The snow broke first. Not the sound of wind or warning, just the sudden give beneath her boots, a white void swallowing light and breath together. Captain Rachel Vance hit the slope hard, rifle slamming against her chest, the mountain swallowing her radio before she could call it in. The world narrowed to ice, blood, and the slow drag of her body down a frozen gully. Hours blurred. She counted time by her pulse, by the taste of iron on her tongue. When the storm cleared, she wasn't waiting for rescue. She was inventorying what still worked. Lungs, will, discipline. That was enough. If you're still here, watching, she'd say, leave your mark below. Because this wasn't about survival. It was about remembering why you fought to live. 0500 hours. The base is already awake. Humidity clings to the steel siding of the maintenance hangars, and the air tastes faintly of salt drifting inland from the Carolina coast. Floodlights burn a pale yellow over the motor pool, cutting through the morning haze as the first engines cough to life. The sound of forklifts echoes against corrugated metal, mechanical, rhythmic, unrelenting. Captain Aaron Walker moves through the scene like part of its design, deliberate, efficient, quiet. The limp in her left leg is almost imperceptible now, a remnant of an IED blast that rewrote her career and forced her from the line back into logistics. Her uniform is pressed, boots clean, hair pulled tight. There is no ceremony in her routine, only order. She adjusts her cover and studies the yard, rows of Humvees waiting for inspection, cargo pallets stacked along the perimeter. Her clipboard is already marked, her day already mapped. The logistics base isn't glamorous. It's a support command, the artery that feeds the fight, invisible until it fails. Here, sweat is currency, and silence is often mistaken for indifference. The young Marines who pass her nod out of habit more than respect. Some glance twice, curious, uncertain. They know her name from the roster, not from the stories that built it. The desert doesn't speak here. Combat experience carries less weight than how fast you move freight. Walker pauses near the loading dock as the first convoy checklist rolls out. Gunny Sergeant Porter barks orders down the line, his voice cutting through diesel and humidity like a blade. He's efficient, the kind of senior NCO who runs the yard with controlled chaos. He doesn't notice her at first, or pretends not to. When he does, the recognition is brief, professional, restrained. She signs the manifest without a word, and the paper trembles slightly in the wind from a passing forklift. Inside the administrative building, fluorescent lights hum against the silence. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Hayes, the commanding officer, walks the corridor with the easy authority of habit. He nods to Walker, acknowledging her with polite professionalism, neither dismissive nor warm. The reassignment orders that placed her here came from higher up, a medical board's quiet verdict that she was still fit to serve, but only in limited capacity. Logistics suited that limitation. The unspoken truth hung in the air she was here because there was nowhere else to send her. By mid-morning, the sun has burned through the haze. The asphalt glistens under the weight of the heat. Walker stands at the perimeter of the yard, clipboard pressed against her chest, watching the movement of supply trucks leaving the compound. Her hand flexes involuntarily, a phantom memory of recoil, of control, of being in command where consequence meant something more than inventory. Porter passes by with two corporals, their laughter clipped and low. She catches a few words. Paper captain, medical pity tour. The tone is careless, not cruel, but it lands with the dull precision of something half-meant. She doesn't react. Years of training have taught her that silence is often the sharpest form of power. Still, there's a shift, small, almost invisible, in how she stands, in how her gaze settles back on the horizon beyond the wire. In the office, the walls are covered with laminated maps and movement charts. A framed photo from her last deployment sits on the desk. Helmand Province, a line of Marines under a bleached sky. Dust covers everything, even the memory. She studies the picture for a moment, tracing the edge of the frame with her thumb before setting it face down. The act is neither rejection nor nostalgia, only containment. Outside, a whistle cuts through the heat as the noon shift turns over. The sound rolls across the compound, dissolving into the hum of machinery and the distant crash of surf. Walker steps out into the light again, clipboard under her arm, the sun pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible weight. She walks past a group of younger Marines who stop talking when she nears. Their silence isn't respect, it's assessment. She feels it but gives them nothing in return. By 1500, the yard is quieter. The rhythm of the day slows. The convoys are out. The paperwork is done. Walker stands alone beside a row of idling trucks, the faint vibration running through the soles of her boots. She looks toward the coastline, the shimmer of heat over the dunes, the suggestion of distance beyond the fence line. A seagull lands on the railing nearby, its feathers ruffled by the heavy air. It watches her briefly, head tilted, before taking flight again. A small, solitary motion that leaves the space emptier than before. She exhales, the sound lost in the engine noise. Nothing has gone wrong yet, but the air feels different now, like the moment before a storm gathers. And though no one else notices, she already knows the wind has changed. The morning after is no different at first glance. The air is heavy again, thick with salt and humidity. 0600 hours, and the logistics yard hums with the familiar rhythm of forklifts reversing, diesel engines sputtering to life, and boots thudding across wet concrete. The same motions, the same sounds, but beneath them, something new has begun to hum. Quieter, sharper, the rhythm of respect faltering out of tune. Captain Aaron Walker crosses the motor pool, clipboard in hand. The smell of grease hangs low, mixing with the damp tang of the coast. Around her, Marines move with calculated energy, but the glances last a second too long, and the silences between movements feel loaded. The change started small, the kind of thing most wouldn't notice unless they were trained to hear the subtleties of tension before a break. On Monday, a torque wrench clatters to the floor near her boots. No apology follows. The corporal who dropped it just watches, jaw set, waiting for a reaction. Walker bends, picks it up, sets it aside. Her hand stays steady. Her eyes do not lift. She keeps walking. The air behind her fills with laughter, soft, but pointed. By Tuesday, the tone of the workspace has shifted. Orders acknowledged with half-hearted nods. Tasks completed, but not reported. Small hesitations before salutes. The kind of passive resistance that corrodes faster than open defiance. She feels it in every briefing, every inspection. Respect slipping a millimeter at a time, replaced by scrutiny disguised as camaraderie. In the supply bay, fluorescent lights hum overhead. Walker checks inventory forms while the junior Marines stack crates. The echo of metal against metal fills the space, each clang carrying a little too much force. They don't speak to her now unless they have to. Their energy feeds off each other. Youth testing the edges of authority, mistaking calm for weakness. Gunny Sergeant Porter notices. He stands near the entryway, clipboard tucked under his arm, watching as the subtle fractures widen. His instinct tells him to intervene, to put the fear of God back into them. But another instinct whispers restraint. Walker hasn't asked for help. She hasn't flinched. Interfering too soon might make things worse, might confirm the rumors that she needs protection. On Wednesday, a convoy drill runs late. The vehicles return coated in mud, and when Walker steps out to inspect them, she finds her name scrawled faintly in the grime across a tailgate. Walker. The Walker. The kind of joke that isn't really a joke. She wipes it away with her sleeve, the grit grinding into the fabric. Her expression doesn't change, but the muscles in her jaw tighten once before settling again. That night, she stays late in the office, the glow of the desk lamp cutting a small circle of light into the darkness. Her reports are precise, her tone even, her posture unbroken. But the air feels different now, Still heavy, still coastal, but charged in a way that mirrors the hum of distant thunder before a storm reaches shore. Thursday brings the first real test, a missing form, a delayed delivery, a chain of excuses that trace back through the same three names. It's not enough for disciplinary action, but it's enough to make her presence feel undermined. Porter catches one of them smirking behind her back, but when he turns to confront it, the expression is already gone, replaced by the blank face of military obedience. He meets her eyes across the yard. She knows he knows. And still, she gives a small, imperceptible shake of the head. Not yet. By Friday, the disrespect is no longer subtle. The laughter isn't quiet anymore. A crate accidentally left in her path. A salute delayed by a second too long. A door left to close just as she reaches it. None of it crosses the line enough for paperwork, but together they form a pattern. Deliberate, coordinated, cruel in its precision. The workday ends under a flat gray sky. The bass slows. Uniforms loosen. The smell of grilled meat begins to drift from the far side of the compound where the Marines gather for their end-of-week ritual. The bonfire. It starts small. A few pallets stacked near the sand berm. A ring of folding chairs arranged in a rough circle. The laughter grows louder as the sun sets, the orange light from the fire reflecting off fuel drums and metallic walls. Walker stands alone at a distance, clipboard still in hand, though the day's tasks are done. The reflection of the flames flickers across her rank insignia, gold catching firelight, gleaming for a moment before fading into shadow. From the yard, Porter watches her silhouette framed against the glow. The men she leads gather closer around the flames, their voices carrying easily through the still air. Laughter, music, the sound of belonging. She turns away before it reaches her. The wind shifts off the ocean, carrying the smell of smoke and salt across the compound. For a moment, it feels like Helmand again. The same orange haze, the same restless silence between bursts of noise. Only now the battle isn't fought in dust or fire, but in the slow burn of disregard. The bonfire snaps, sending a burst of sparks into the air. They rise and scatter, carried upward until the wind claims them. Behind her, the laughter continues, louder now, less controlled. Ahead of her, the darkness deepens, and somewhere in the distance, a single ember drifts too far from the flame. It lands quietly, unnoticed, but it keeps burning. The fire burned high that night, a single, restless blaze framed against the black horizon. The air was thick with salt and wood smoke, the sound of country music bleeding from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on a fuel drum. Empty beer bottles caught the firelight, glinting like shrapnel scattered across the sand. The laughter was loud, the kind that hides unease behind its volume. Captain Aaron Walker hadn't planned to be there. She'd come to check the convoy logs left unsecured near the motor pool. The bonfire was just beyond the fence, the glow flickering against the sheet metal walls of the maintenance bay. From the distance, it looked harmless. Marines letting off steam at the end of another week. Routine. Controlled chaos. But as she drew closer, the sound shifted. A chant. A rhythm. Laughter bending into something meaner. She stopped at the edge of the light, unseen for a moment, and saw what they'd done. Her jacket hung from a wooden post, her name tape still attached. The tan fabric swayed slightly in the night breeze, sleeves fluttering like a flag in retreat. A few Marines stood around it, their faces half lit, grinning through the distortion of alcohol and adrenaline. Someone tossed a splash of lighter fluid, the fabric darkened, then caught. Fire crawled up the sleeve, slow at first, then hungrily. No one noticed her right away. The music thumped. Boots stomped in rhythm. The jacket burned. A slow, deliberate spectacle. Walker stood perfectly still. The heat from the fire brushed her face, warm and biting. Her eyes didn't move from the flame. The sound of her pulse was louder than the laughter now, but her breathing stayed even, measured like she was counting cadence. When the first Marine saw her, the sound faltered. A few others turned. The noise died in uneven pieces, the laughter thinning out until all that was left was the crackle of burning fabric and the faint metallic pop of a heating button. The silence was worse than the noise. No words came from her. None were needed. She stepped forward once, the sand crunching softly under her boots. The fire reflected in her eyes. The remaining sleeve collapsed inward, the flame consuming the embroidered name, Walker. She turned, slow and steady, and walked away. Not back toward her quarters, but to the far edge of the base, where the night met the ocean. The wind there was cooler. The sound of the surf carried far beyond the compound, a reminder that some things moved freely no matter how tightly men tried to contain them. She stayed there for a long while, staring at the dark water, the reflection of the fire still faint behind her. When she finally left, no one saw her go. The night stretched thin, then broke into dawn. At 0600 hours, the base stirred awake, the same clatter of machinery, the same hum of engines, but there was an edge to the air now, something quiet and uneasy. Word had already spread, though no one said it aloud. The hangar felt heavier, as if the night's shame had seeped into the concrete. Then, the sound. A black SUV rolling slowly through the main gate, tires crunching on gravel. Heads turned. The vehicle stopped in front of the motor pool, and the engine cut off. The door opened. Captain Aaron Walker stepped out. The sight silenced the yard. She was in full combat gear, plate carrier, helmet, gloves, boots, the desert camouflage immaculate, her rank insignia polished to a dull gleam. The scar along her leg, barely visible beneath the fabric, no longer seemed like weakness, but memory, proof of distance traveled. She moved with deliberate precision, her shoulders square, her gaze fixed. She walked across the lot toward the remains of the bonfire pit. No one spoke. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of her boots and the faint hiss of the ocean wind moving through the wire fence. Gyscott Porter watched from the far side of the yard, motionless. He didn't speak either. He didn't need to. The silence carried its own authority now, a weight that pressed against every chest. Walker stopped where the ashes still smoldered faintly in the sand. The blackened remnants of her name tape lay half buried, edges curled inward. She crouched, picked it up, and brushed away the soot with her thumb. The letters were still visible, faint, but legible. She held it for a long moment. Then, without a word, she tucked it into her chest pocket and turned toward the formation gathering around her. No one looked her in the eye, but everyone felt it. The shift, the unspoken correction of balance. In a place where rank had been tested and found wanting, dignity had redefined the chain of command. Porter finally stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He gave a small nod, not as acknowledgement of authority, but of respect, the kind earned only through endurance. Walker returned the gesture, brief and exact. Then she walked past him toward the administrative building, her pace unhurried, her posture unbroken. Behind her, the Marines who had laughed the night before stood in a loose semicircle. The fire pit still smoked faintly between them, the ashes cooling in the morning light. The silence stretched, not awkward, not fearful, but reverent. The sun rose higher, burning off the last of the haze. The base seemed cleaner now, sharper. Every sound, every clank of metal, every shout of command carried a new clarity, as if the night's ugliness had been cauterized by the heat of its own shame. At 0700 hours, the daily brief began as usual. The convoy routes, the manifests, the schedule. Nothing said, nothing changed. Yet everything had, and as the wind moved inland from the sea, it carried the faintest trace of smoke, the last breath of what had burned, now turned to air. What they destroyed was cloth. What she reclaimed was something none of them could ever touch. The sound came first. Boots striking concrete, steady and deliberate. The maintenance bay was nearly empty, the morning light bleeding in through high windows and catching on the sheen of oil pooled beneath the vehicles. The air was close, thick with the metallic scent of fuel and old grease. It was the kind of silence that warned before impact, the stillness before the hammer falls. Captain Aaron Walker stepped inside. No formation, no command, just the weight of presence. She didn't need to announce why she was there. Everyone already knew. 3 Marines stood near the workbench, the same faces from the bonfire. Their movements were stiff, the nervous bravado of men who hadn't yet learned that silence can convict louder than confession. The youngest shifted his weight, trying to meet her eyes and failing. Walker's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't angry. Anger was a privilege of those uncertain in their cause. This was something colder, quieter, measured. She set her gloves down on the table, palms flat, the leather leaving faint smudges on the surface. The echo of that sound carried through the bay. One of them straightened, an instinctive reaction to command tone, muscle memory outrunning arrogance. The moment stretched, then the movement. A crate nudged from behind her, deliberate, testing. The scrape of wood on concrete rang out like a challenge. She turned her head slightly, enough to see it, but not enough to acknowledge. The silence that followed was thick enough to hear breath. When she moved, it was efficient, not theatrical. A single step, a pivot, the kind of motion drilled through years of training. The Marine closest to her flinched, hand half raised. She caught his wrist midair and redirected it downward, using his own balance against him. He hit the ground hard, the impact echoing off the bay walls, not broken, just stopped. The second moved without thinking, loyalty or panic. It didn't matter. She sidestepped, arm deflecting his momentum, shoulder rolling with precision. He went down too, breath forced from his lungs in a hollow gasp. The third froze. Walker straightened, her boots steady, posture unbroken. She didn't gloat, didn't speak. The silence returned heavier than before, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the faint whine of a wrench dropped somewhere deeper in the hangar. Guy Sergeant Porter entered from the side door. His expression was unreadable. He'd known this moment was coming, maybe even allowed it. Behind him came 2 MPs, their steps clipped, their tone procedural. They took position near the entrance as Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Hayes arrived, his face tight with something between disbelief and fury. Not at her, at them. What followed wasn't chaos. It was order, reclaiming its shape. Porter spoke briefly to the MPs. They began collecting statements, cataloging evidence, restoring discipline by the book. Walker said nothing. She stood at parade rest, gloves still on the table, gaze level. One of the fallen Marines sat up, shame replacing defiance as the realization took root. They hadn't faced weakness. They'd tested someone stronger than any of them had understood. Hayes stepped forward, holding a single sheet of paper that had just been pulled from her personnel file. The header carried citations: Bronze Star, Navy Commendation Medal with Valor Device, 2 deployments to Helmand and Kandahar. Her file wasn't classified, but few had ever looked. They'd only seen her scars, not the reason she'd earned them. Word spread fast. Marines filtering in for maintenance duty stopped at the threshold. They didn't speak, just stood in the periphery, watching the quiet correction of balance unfold. Porter's voice cut through briefly, issuing procedural orders. The MPs escorted the offenders out, restrained, not humiliated. Walker didn't follow them with her eyes. She kept her focus forward. Control was its own form of justice. When it was over, the bay felt different. The tension that had hung for days dissolved into something cleaner. Not relief, but clarity. Hayes dismissed the MPs, then looked at her, Det. His nod was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. A recognition restored. Outside. The sun had climbed higher, reflecting off the tarmac until the air shimmered. The sound of morning drills carried faintly from the training field beyond the compound. Normalcy resuming, but not the same kind. The base had seen something irreversible, not a fight, but a demonstration of composure under provocation. Walker walked the length of the yard alone, her boots striking in rhythm with the steady pulse of distant engines. No one spoke as she passed. They didn't need to. Respect, once fractured, had reassembled itself in silence, not through apology, but through acknowledgement. By mid-afternoon, administrative reports had been filed. The Marines responsible were reassigned under disciplinary review. Procedures followed protocol, clean and efficient. But the story traveled faster than paper, through whispers, through looks, through the intangible current that moves between those who serve. That evening, the maintenance bay was swept and closed early. The smell of oil still lingered, but the air felt lighter, rinsed of something corrosive. Porter stood in the doorway, watching as Walker crossed toward the main building. Her pace was even, her posture precise. There was no victory in her stride, only equilibrium restored. As she reached the top of the steps, the wind picked up from the coast, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of rain. She paused for a moment, glancing toward the flagpole in the courtyard. The fabric snapped once in the wind, a single, crisp sound that cut through the distance like a final word. Justice, in the end, hadn't been loud. It had been measured, delivered not through force, but through restraint. And as order returned, so did respect, earned again, the way it always should be, quietly and without demand. Evening settled slowly over the base, the kind of calm that arrives only after something has been set right. The air was cooler now, touched by the ocean's breath. At 1700 hours, the flag began its descent, fabric whispering as it slid down the halyard, gold light catching the edges of red and white. The ritual was quiet, reverent. Boots clicked, hands rose, and for a moment, the entire compound seemed to breathe in unison. Captain Aaron Walker stood at the edge of the parade ground, her shadow long across the concrete. The last notes of the bugle carried into the humid air before fading into the steady rhythm of waves beyond the fence line. The same base that once hummed with tension now moved with precision again. Formations sharp, reports punctual, salutes crisp. Respect had returned, not as ceremony, but as a living discipline. Inside the maintenance bay, new orders were posted, training protocols updated, safety checks revised. Not punishment, reform. The message was clear. Professionalism wasn't optional. It was the foundation that held everything upright. Guyskit Porter oversaw the adjustments, quiet but watchful. Even Hayes's tone carried a measure of restraint now, the kind reserved for those who had witnessed the cost of neglecting respect. Walker's office was small, metal desk, 2 chairs, a bulletin board marked by neat symmetry. The evening light spilled through the slatted blinds, striping her workspace in warm, amber bands. Papers rustled gently in the breeze from the open window. On the desk sat a single framed photograph, her platoon in Helmand, dust on uniforms, smiles thin and real. The same image she had carried through every transfer, every posting. It was the weight she never spoke of, and the reason she never needed to. She studied it briefly, her reflection faint in the glass. The scars beneath her sleeve no longer pulled. The silence that once felt like exile had become something else, a place of balance. She didn't think about vindication, only equilibrium. Outside, the sound of footsteps approached. A group of younger Marines passed by her doorway, their laughter subdued, their posture formal, even off-duty. One paused at the threshold, a private fresh from training, eyes uncertain but intent. He hesitated, then brought his hand up in a precise salute, not because regulation required it, but because understanding did. Walker returned it slowly, perfectly measured. No smile, no words. Just the quiet exchange of something earned and understood, the kind of respect that doesn't fade with time or distance. The Marine held the salute for a second longer than necessary, then lowered his hand and moved on. The base quieted as night deepened. The last vehicles parked. Generators hummed low, and the flag now rested folded in the arms of the color guard. From her window, Walker watched the lights dim one by one across the yard, her posture still, her presence centered in the calm she had rebuilt. On her desk, the photograph caught the final slant of sunset, the faces of Marines long gone bathed in gold. She reached out, adjusted the frame a fraction of an inch, aligning it square with the desk's edge. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but in that motion lay the story, the restoration of balance, the quiet symmetry of justice and endurance. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the low murmur of the ocean against the shore. The sound was steady, ancient, and whole. And in that silence, Captain Aaron Walker found what she had always known, that dignity needs no defense, and respect, once earned, speaks louder than any voice could ever do. What do you remember first? The noise, or the silence that followed it? Most don't realize how quiet the world gets after everything's been stripped down to instinct. Captain Rachel Vance learned that in the cold, that survival isn't loud, and strength doesn't announce itself. It breathes. It waits. It endures. The storm ended, but her lesson didn't. Sometimes you win not by moving faster, but by refusing to fall apart when the mountain does. If her story hit you the way it hit me, tell me below. I read every word. Subscribe if you believe calm under pressure still matters. Share this with someone who's learned that endurance doesn't need applause, because silence is a weapon too, one earned through pain, carried with pride. The ridge is clear now. She's still standing, and somewhere out there, the wind's still waiting for her next step.